Welcome to this lecture on evolutionary biology. Today, we are going to explore one of the most fascinating survival strategies in the natural world, adaptive resemblances. Imagine playing a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek in a dense green forest. If you wear a bright neon orange shirt, you will be spotted immediately and lose. But if you wear specialized camouflage, you blend perfectly into the trees and win. In nature, the stakes are much higher because losing means being eaten by a hungry predator. Let us dive into how animals dress up to survive. Building on that game of hide and seek, we see that animals have evolved incredible ways to dress up to survive. This is not just about aesthetics, it is a matter of life and death. Some organisms survive by blending seamlessly into their background, making themselves invisible to predators. Others take a completely different approach, evolving to look like something highly dangerous to scare attackers away. This incredible, life-saving survival strategy is what biologists formally call adaptive resemblance. It is a perfect showcase of how environmental pressures shape the physical traits of living organisms over time. Now that we understand the basic idea, let us look at the formal definition. Adaptive resemblance is a fascinating evolutionary phenomenon where a species evolves physical traits that closely match its environment or another distinct species. These traits are incredibly diverse. They can include specific colors, intricate patterns, physical shapes, or even unique behavioral movements. By developing these traits, the organism gains a massive selective advantage. Primarily, this works by tricking predators and drastically reducing the likelihood of being eaten. It is a brilliant evolutionary deception that ensures the continuation of the species. Having defined the phenomenon, we can now divide it into the two main categories we study in evolutionary biology: camouflage and mimicry. Camouflage, which is also known as cryptic coloration, is when an organism blends seamlessly into its physical surroundings. Think of a stick insect resting invisibly on a branch. Mimicry, on the other hand, is when an organism evolves to look like another specific living creature. A classic example is a completely harmless snake evolving the exact color bands of a highly venomous snake to scare away attackers. Both strategies achieve the same goal through different visual tricks. So, why does this concept matter so much in the study of evolutionary biology? Adaptive resemblance is one of the clearest, most striking pieces of visual evidence for natural selection in action. It shows us exactly how harsh environmental pressures physically shape the bodies of living organisms over thousands of generations. Without these resemblances, many vulnerable prey species would be hunted to extinction, which would completely collapse delicate ecological food webs. In the real world, scientists study these patterns to understand predator-prey dynamics, track evolutionary arms races, and even design better human camouflage for military purposes. To truly understand this concept, we need to quantify exactly how much of a survival advantage this resemblance gives an organism. This brings us to a beautifully simple yet powerful formula. The variable W represents the relative fitness of the organism, meaning its overall reproductive success compared to the best adapted individual. The variable S is the baseline selection coefficient, which represents the maximum predation pressure or penalty for looking completely different from the environment. Finally, the variable R is the resemblance index, ranging from 0 for absolutely no resemblance to 1 for perfect resemblance. When the value of R increases, the penalty subtracted from 1 becomes much smaller, meaning the organism's fitness increases. Now that we have our formula, let us look at a real-world scenario involving a population of harmless butterflies evolving to mimic a highly toxic species. The environment has a baseline selection pressure against non-mimics of 0.6. A specific butterfly has developed a wing pattern, giving it a resemblance index of 0.8. We need to calculate its relative fitness. We substitute our known values into the equation. Subtracting 0.8 from 1 gives us 0.2, which is the vulnerability factor. Multiplying the pressure of 0.6 by this 0.2 gives a reduced penalty of 0.12. Subtracting this from 1 leaves a final relative fitness score of 0.88. Physically, this means the butterfly successfully tricks the vast majority of predators, securing a very high survival rate. Before we move on to another example, let us take a closer look at what happened inside those parentheses. The term 1 minus R represents the vulnerability factor. It physically represents the fact that even a good mimic might still be slightly different from the perfect toxic model. In our butterfly example, an 80% visual match left a 20% difference. This 20% is the exact window of opportunity where a sharp-eyed bird might still recognize it as harmless prey. By multiplying this vulnerability factor by the total predation pressure, we find the actual reduced fitness penalty the organism faces in the wild. Now, let us examine a different forest environment, where a species of stick insect is desperately trying to camouflage against brown twigs. The predation pressure from local lizards is extremely high, at 0.9. A mutant insect is born with a very slight brownish tint, giving it a low resemblance index of 0.3. We want to determine if this tiny mutation will save its life. We insert these values into our fitness model. Subtracting 0.3 from 1 gives a dangerously high non-resemblance factor of 0.7. Multiplying the extreme predation pressure of 0.9 by this 0.7 visibility factor gives a severe penalty of 0.63. Subtracting this from 1 yields a final relative fitness of only 0.37. This insect is still highly likely to be eaten. Reflecting on that calculation, we see the harsh mathematical reality of being a poor mimic in an unforgiving world. A final relative fitness score of 0.37 is incredibly low. Because the insect is still highly visible 70% of the time against the brown twigs, it absorbs a massive portion of the environmental predation pressure. This shows that predators are highly efficient at spotting and eating insects that only have a weak resemblance to their environment. It perfectly illustrates that in environments with intense predation, a weak adaptive resemblance is often not enough to guarantee survival. To visually reinforce what we have just learned and calculated, let us look at this diagram comparing our two main strategies. On the left, we see cryptic coloration, where a gecko is blending perfectly into the textured bark of a tree. Its physical pattern matches the environment. On the right, we see Bayesian mimicry, where a harmless snake mimics the exact banding pattern of a venomous model snake. Below these examples is the resemblance index axis, ranging from 0 to 1. As an organism's physical traits evolve to become a closer match to their background or their toxic model, their position on this axis moves closer to 1, representing a perfect, life-saving resemblance. We've covered the full topic of adaptive resemblances, so let us review the key takeaways. First, adaptive resemblance is an essential evolutionary strategy where organisms survive by deceiving the visual senses of their predators or prey. Second, Whether through blending in via camouflage or copying warning signals via mimicry, these physical changes directly increase an organism's relative fitness. Finally, by understanding the mathematics of selection coefficients and resemblance indices, we see exactly how evolution works as a numbers game. Even small improvements in an organism's resemblance can provide the crucial difference between life and death in the unforgiving wild. You now have a solid understanding of this incredible evolutionary phenomenon.